I've told this story maybe 4 times in my whole life, and every time my throat tightens at the same place. Not the sad part. People always brace for the sad part. It's the small part, the part where a stranger does one quiet thing she didn't have to do, and you realize the whole town had been wrong about itself for 30 years. I'm not a writer. I'm a man who fixes fences and worries about rain. But some things sit in you like a stone in your boot, and the only way to get rid of them is to shake them loose and let somebody else hold them for a while. So here, hold this one. It started with a noise in my barn at 4 in the morning, and it ended with the entire town of Halsey learning what it was actually made of. The dog woke me before the noise did. That's the thing nobody believes, that an old cattle dog with one cloudy eye and a hip that clicks like a turnstile can hear a child cough through 2 walls and 40 yards of dark. But Brister could. He stood at the foot of my bed making a low sound in his chest, not a growl, more like a question he didn't have the words for, and I lay there in the gray of false dawn arguing with myself the way you do when you're 58 and your knees have opinions about getting out of a warm bed. Coyote, I told myself, raccoon in the feed. Brister didn't believe me either. I'll tell you about me quick, because the rest of this isn't really about me, and I'd like to get out of the way. My name is Walt Coomer. I ran, I should say, the word still catches, a small operation 11 miles outside of Halsey, which is one of those towns that exists mostly as a reason for a grain elevator and a 4-way stop. My wife Dell passed 2 winters before any of this, and I'd be lying if I said the place hadn't gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. I keep a notebook, always have. Dell used to tease me about it. Walt, you'd log your own funeral if they'd let you keep the pencil. Mostly it's weather and calving dates and what I paid for diesel, but I'd started writing other things in it after she went. Stupid things. Saw a heron at the stock pond. Dell would have liked that. Things with nowhere to go. I'm telling you about the notebook because it's how I remember the exact words I wrote that morning, before I knew anything. 4:10 a.m. something in the barn. B won't settle. Going to look. That's it. That's the last innocent thing I ever wrote in that notebook. Everything after it has a shadow on it. I pulled on my boots without socks, which I regretted, and took the big flashlight off the hook by the door, the one that doubles as a club if a man needs it to. The yard was cold in that wet way that gets into your teeth. April in this country can't make up its mind. Frost on the truck windows, mud sucking at my heels, and somewhere off east the sky thinking very slowly about turning blue. Brister went ahead of me low, his bad hip clicking. He stopped at the barn door, the side door, the small one, because the big one was chained like always, and he looked back at me. I want you to understand that look, because I've thought about it 1,000 times since. It wasn't fear. It was the look a dog gives you when he's already decided something is yours and he's just waiting for you to catch up. I put my hand on the door and I heard it. A cough, small, wet, the kind of cough that comes out of a chest too little to make a big one. And then a woman's voice, barely a breath, saying SHH, 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 baby, I know, in the particular rhythm of someone who has said it 100 times that night already and means it less each time only because she's running out of herself. I stood there with my hand on cold metal, and my heart going like a colt against a gate. Here is the truth, and I'm not proud of it. My first feeling was not kindness. My first feeling was anger. Somebody was in my barn. Somebody had gotten past the chain, past the dog, into the one place that was still mine and Dell's and nobody else's, where her old hen still scratched in the straw she'd hauled in by the bale because she said the store-bought feed didn't smell right. I felt invaded. I gripped that flashlight like a club and I thought, in those words exactly, the hell you are. Then I opened the door and the flashlight beam swung across the straw and I saw them. A woman, younger than my own daughter, who lives in Tulsa and calls on Sundays. She was sitting up with her back against the old tractor tire, and she had a coat over 2 children, one maybe 5 and one not even a year, and the way she'd arranged herself, I'll never forget it. She'd put her own body between the kids and the draft from the wall, so the cold came through her first. Her lips were the wrong color. She'd given the children her coat and she was sitting there in a t-shirt in 41 degrees, and when the light hit her face, she didn't scream and she didn't run. She did the worst thing. The thing that broke whatever anger I had clean in half. She put her hand up, not to shield her eyes from the light, to shield the babies. And she said, "Please, please don't call anybody. We'll be gone before it's light. I swear we'll be gone." Now, I want to be honest about the next few minutes, because if I clean them up I'm lying to you, and Dell hated a liar more than she hated anything. I didn't say anything kind right away. I'm slow. I've always been slow. Dell called it Walt time. Said I process things the way a fence post processes a flood, just standing there taking it until it was over. I stood in that doorway with the light on this woman and her 2 kids, and I felt about 6 things at once, and not all of them were good ones. I thought about my insurance. I thought about the gun in the house. I thought, God forgive me, what kind of woman drags bobbies into a stranger's barn in the cold, before I'd even let myself think the obvious answer, which is the kind with nowhere else. The little one coughed again. That same wet, small sound. And the woman flinched like it was her own ribs cracking, and she pulled the baby tighter, and she looked up at me with a face I have only seen one other time in my life, on the face of a man in a hospital hallway being told the surgery hadn't worked. It's a face past begging. Begging is for people who still think the world might be talked into mercy. This was the face of someone who had stopped expecting it and was bracing for the boot. I lowered the flashlight. "How long's that baby had that cough?" I said. It wasn't what either of us expected me to say. I saw her blink. I think she'd had a whole script ready for "Get out, I'm calling the sheriff. This is private property," and I jumped the rails on her. 3 days, she said. It's getting worse at night. It's croup, I said. I don't know how I knew. I think I half didn't. But my daughter had croup at that age, and Dell stood in a steamed-up bathroom with her for 6 hours one night, and the sound of it had lodged somewhere in me. Or close to it. He needs steam, and he needs warm, and he needs a doctor if it gets where you can hear him breathing in. She stared at me. "You're not gonna freeze a baby to death in my barn," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant, because I was angry again, not at her this time, but at the whole shape of a world that had put her there. "Come up to the house. There's heat. There's a kettle." I stopped. I was not a man who invited strangers into the house Dell built. I hadn't invited anyone in 2 years. "Come on," I said again, quieter, "before I think better of it." She didn't move. She studied me the way you study ice before you put your weight on it. "What do you want?" she said, flat. And I understood the question under the question, and it turned my stomach that a woman would have to ask it, that the world had taught her to ask it, and I was suddenly furious on her behalf at men I'd never met. "I want," I said slowly, "to not have a dead child in my barn. That's the entire list. You can stand in my kitchen with a frying pan if it makes you feel better. The dog'll watch me. He doesn't trust me either." And this is the part where my throat goes, she laughed. One short, broken sound, more air than laugh, the kind that's halfway to crying. And the 5-year-old, who'd been pretending to be asleep this whole time the way kids do when they're scared, opened one eye and looked at the dog. "Is that dog nice?" the kid whispered. "That dog," I said, "is the boss of this entire farm, and don't let him tell you different." Brister, hearing himself discussed, walked over and lay down directly against the 5-year-old like he'd been doing it his whole life, and the kid put a hand in his fur, and the woman watched her child's hand disappear into the warmth of an animal, and something in her face came loose. "Okay," she said, "okay." Her name was Mara, the 5-year-old was Devon, the baby was Theo. And Theo's cough was bad enough that I didn't sleep again that night, and neither did she. I won't pretend I knew her whole story by sunup. People aren't like that. They don't pour out at the first warm kitchen. What I got that first night I got in pieces, between trips to the bathroom where I'd run the shower hot and sit her and the baby in the steam, between cups of tea she held but didn't drink because she was watching me too hard to swallow. I got that there'd been a man. I got that the man was the reason for the leaving and not the reason for the staying. I got that home was a word she said like it had teeth. I got that they'd been in the car 4 days, and the car was now a quarter-mile down my access road with a dead alternator, and the last of their things in trash bags in the trunk, and that she'd seen my barn from the road and made a decision that no mother should have to make, which is that roof or no roof, and she'd carried a sick baby and walked a tired 5-year-old across a wet field in the dark to sleep in a stranger's straw because it was warmer than steel, and that was the whole of her options. Around 6, with the window going gray-gold, Theo's cough eased. The steam did its work. He fell into real sleep against his mother's chest, the deep kind, his little fist opening up the way they do when a baby finally lets go, and Mara looked down at him and then up at me, and her face did something complicated. "Why?" she said. "Just that, why?" I thought about it. Walt time. The kettle ticked as it cooled. "My wife," I said finally, "would have had you in this kitchen before I got the barn door all the way open. She'd be ashamed it took me as long as it did." I looked at my hands. "She's been gone 2 years. I've been pretending I don't have to be the person she'd want me to be on account of she's not here to want it. Turns out that's a lie a man can only tell himself so long." Mara didn't say anything, but she drank the tea finally, all of it, and I counted that as something. Here's where the town comes in, and here's where it gets. I don't have the right word. Complicated isn't big enough. I should have kept it quiet. Lord knows I meant to. But Halsey is a town of 411 souls, and a man can't buy croup medicine, kids' clothes, a car alternator, and 3 days of groceries at Dunlap's General, without Sherry Dunlap counting it up and wondering out loud who Walt Coomer was suddenly feeding, seeing as how he'd barely fed himself since the funeral. "You got company, Walt," she said, ringing up the children's cough syrup with one penciled eyebrow climbing toward her hairline. "And here is the moment. I want you to sit in this moment with me because everything that came after lived or died right here, in the canned goods aisle of Dunlap's General, with the fluorescent light buzzing, and a Tim McGraw song on the radio and Sherry Dunlap waiting on an answer with her hand on the register. I could have lied. Easy. Daughters visiting. Nobody would have checked. The lie was right there, soft and round, and it would have kept Mara invisible, kept her safe, because invisible is the only safe a woman like Mara had ever known. But I thought about Mara putting her hand up to shield the baby from the light. I thought about her sitting in a t-shirt in the cold so the kids could have her coat. I thought about please don't call anybody, we'll be gone before it's light. The way she'd been taught that being seen was the same as being in danger. And I got, all at once, angrier than I'd been in 2 years. Not at Sherry, at the whole machine of it, at a world that had made a good mother into a thing that hides in barns. "Yeah," I said, loud enough that Earl Pecksek heard it from the hardware side. "I got a family staying with me, young woman and her 2 kids. Car broke down and they were in a bad way and they're staying till they're not." I set the cough syrup on the counter harder than I needed to. "Baby's got the croup. You got a humidifier in this store or not?" The whole place went quiet the way a room does when something true gets said in it. And then Sherry Dunlap, who I'd known 40 years, who I'd buried a husband alongside, who I'd have told you was the nosiest woman in 3 counties, Sherry Dunlap set down her pencil, and her face, which had been all curiosity, changed into something else. "How old's the baby?" she said. "Not quite 1. "And the other?" "5 boy, Devon." Sherry came around the counter. She is not a fast woman. She has a bad foot and a worse temper. But she came around that counter and she went down the aisle and she started pulling things off shelves. The humidifier, yes, but also a box of those little kids' bandages with the cartoons, and a stuffed dog that had been gathering dust by the registers since Christmas, and a sack of those Clementine's kids can peel themselves. She piled it all on the counter next to my cough syrup, and she said, "This part's not on Walt's ticket." "Sherry." "Don't you sherry me, Walt Coomer. Her voice cracked right down the middle. "You know what today is?" I didn't. "It's the 11th, she said. "My Danny would have been 41 today, and he was a baby with the croup once too, and I sat up with him in a steam bath in a trailer outside Enid with no money and no man and no idea how I was gonna make it to morning." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, fast, embarrassed. "And a woman I never met before bought my groceries that week. Never told me her name, just paid and walked out." She slid the stuffed dog across the counter at me. "You tell that mama somebody knows. You tell her somebody knows." I drove home with a truck full of things I hadn't paid for and a feeling in my chest I hadn't had in 2 years. And I want to tell you it was a good feeling, but it was bigger than good. It was the feeling of a door opening in a house you thought was empty. I didn't know yet that by supper time, Sherry Dunlap would have told Pastor Vane, and Pastor Vane would have told the quilting circle, and the quilting circle would have told everyone alive. I didn't know that within 2 days there'd be a casserole on my porch with no name on it, and then 4 casseroles, and then a problem I never expected to have, which was too much. I didn't know that some of what came would be kindness, and some of it would be the other thing, the curious thing, the proud thing, the thing where a town decides a stranger is its project, and that telling those two apart would nearly cost me Mara's trust entirely. I didn't know that Mara, watching headlights come up my access road that first evening, would grab both children and go rigid as a fence wire, because to her, people coming had only ever meant one thing, and it wasn't casseroles. All I knew, driving home with a stuffed dog on the seat beside me, was that I'd said a true thing out loud in Dunlap's General, and the roof hadn't caved in. That for the first time since Dell, I'd be coming home to a house with a light on in it that I hadn't left on myself. I pulled into the yard at dusk. There was steam on the kitchen window. Brister was on the porch, and when he saw the truck he didn't bark, he thumped, his whole back end going, the way he used to when Dell came home. And in the window, small and gold, I could see Mara holding Theo, and Devon up on a chair beside her, and she was showing him something at the stove, and for 1/2 of 1 second before she heard the truck and went still for 1/2 second, she looked like a woman who lived somewhere. I sat in the truck a minute before I went in, Walt time. I took out my notebook, and under the line that said something in the barn, "B won't settle, going to look," I wrote, "Her name is Mara, don't let the town break this." I didn't know yet how hard that second part was going to be. I told the truth in Dunlap's General, and the truth had legs. By the time the sun went down on that first day, Halsey knew there was a young mother and 2 children out at the Coomer place, and a town that small doesn't hold a thing like that gently or quietly. It holds it the way a kid holds a baby bird, with the very best intentions and absolutely no idea of its own strength. What I'm about to tell you is the part I got wrong. I want to be plain about that. I'm not the hero of the middle of this story. For a stretch in here I was nearly the thing that ruined it. The casseroles came first, and the casseroles were easy. A dish appeared on my porch the second evening with foil over it and no note, still warm, smelling of onions and good cheese. The third evening there were 2. By the end of that week, I had a chest freezer problem I'd never had in my life. Dell would have laughed herself sick, and I was making up reasons to drive into town just so I could thank people without saying out loud whose mouths the food was actually for. Mara wouldn't eat the casseroles at first. I didn't understand it. I'd come in with a still warm dish and set it on the counter, and she'd look at it like it was something that might go off in her hands. She fed it to the kids. She'd have fed the kids her own arm, but she herself ate after they slept, standing up at the counter fast, the way you eat when part of you is convinced the food's going to be taken back. It took me a few days of Walt time to understand. People who have been kept don't trust the gift. Every kind thing she'd ever been handed had come with a string she couldn't see until it was around her neck. The man, she never said his name, and I never asked. The man had been generous. She told me once, low, while Theo slept on her shoulder. He'd been generous right up until she did something he didn't like, and then everything he'd given got named and counted and held against her. You know what I do for you. You know what you'd be without me. So when a town she'd never met started leaving food on the porch, every dish on that counter was, to her, a debt she didn't know the terms of. They don't want anything, I told her. Everybody wants something, she said, not bitter, just tired, the way you'd say water's wet. I didn't have an answer for that because I wasn't sure she was wrong. I was about to find out she wasn't. It was Pastor Vane who started the turn, and he started it meaning well, which is the worst way these things start. Vane is a decent man with a loud heart and the social instincts of a golden retriever. He came out that second Sunday in his good shoes, picking across my muddy yard, with a check in an envelope from the church's benevolence fund, and this is the part a photographer. The church did a little newsletter. Vane had the bright idea that Mara's story would move people. Inspire giving, he said. He used the word blessing 4 times before he got to the truck door. I want to tell you I stopped it at the gate. I didn't. That's my failure and I'll own it. I was so taken with the goodness of it all, the casseroles, the check, the way the whole town had turned toward this woman like sunflowers, that I'd started to forget she was a person and not a story. I'd started, God help me, to enjoy being the man who'd found the family in the barn. People shook my hand at the elevator. Earl Pecksek, who hadn't said 10 words to me since Dell's funeral, fixed Mara's alternator for parts cost and wouldn't take the labor. I'd been alone 2 years and suddenly I was somebody again, and I didn't notice that I was getting warm off a fire that wasn't mine to stand at. So when Vane said photo for the newsletter, I said, I'll ask her, and I went inside half expecting her to say yes, because who wouldn't, and that right there shows you how far I drifted from understanding her at all. She was at the window when I came in. She'd already seen the second person get out of the truck. She'd already seen the camera. No, she said, before I opened my mouth. It's just for the church paper, they want to. No, and she had Theo up off the floor and Devon's hand in hers in about 1.5 seconds, and she'd backed against the far wall and her face had gone to that place I'd seen the first night, past begging, braced for the boot. You don't understand. You put my picture out and he finds us. That's how he finds us, Walt, that's exactly how. A church paper goes online. Somebody shares it. Look at this beautiful story. And he's got it on his phone by Tuesday and he knows the county. Her voice was shaking, but it was low, always low, because Devon was right there, and she'd spent his whole life keeping the fear under her tongue. I didn't run 200 miles to get put on the internet by a nice man. And I stood there. Walt, time for once was too slow. The understanding came over me like cold water down the collar all at once and too late. I'd done exactly what she was afraid of. Not the photo, not yet. But I'd made her visible. I'd stood in Dunlap's and announced her to a town, and it had felt like courage, and it had felt like the thing Dell would have wanted, and I hadn't once stopped to ask whether being seen was safe for her. I'd been so busy being a good man in front of people that I'd forgotten what good was for. I'll get rid of him, I said. I went out and I told Vane no. He was disappointed. He had that retriever face, all wounded confusion, but it's such a beautiful thing the Lord is doing. And I'm afraid I was shorter with him than a decent man should be with a pastor in his own yard. I took the check, because the check was real help and Mara would need it. I sent the camera home, and I stood in my yard and watched the truck go and felt about 2 inches tall. When I came back in, Mara had put the kids in the back room. She was at the counter with her back to me. Her shoulders were up around her ears. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't think. No, she said, you didn't. And then after a minute, quieter, it's not your fault. You're a person who's never had to think about it. That's not a thing to be sorry for. That's just, she made a small motion with her hand like brushing away a fly. That's just lucky. That landed harder than if she'd screamed at me. That's just lucky. The whole gap between her life and mine, in 3 words, said without an ounce of cruelty. I didn't sleep much that night either. The next morning I started thinking like her. It's the only useful thing I did in the whole middle of this story, and it's the thing that turned it around, so let me give it its due. I drove into town and I did not announce anything. I went to Sherry Dunlap, who'd started all the talking, and I told her the truth, not Mara's truth, but the shape of the danger. There's a reason she ran, I said, and the more famous this gets, the more it puts her in the path of the thing she ran from. I need the town to help quiet Sherry. I need it to be the kind of help that doesn't have its picture taken. Now, I'd have bet money this was beyond Halsey. A town that small runs on knowing everybody's business. Asking it to do a kindness and keep its mouth shut about it, I figured that was like asking the creek to run uphill. I was wrong about my town. I'd been wrong about it for 30 years, the same way I'd been wrong about Sherry Dunlap being nothing but nosy. Because Sherry took off her apron, which I'd never once seen her do midday, and she came out from behind that counter and she said, "Walt, half this town came here from something. You think you're the only one with secrets. You think I don't know which women in this county flinch when a truck door slams. Honey, we invented keeping quiet. We just usually do it the wrong direction to protect the man." Her jaw set. "You let me do it the right direction for once. You watch." And what happened over the next 2 weeks, I still can hardly believe. The casseroles kept coming, but the notes stopped. No names, nothing to trace. Earl Pecksek finished the car and then, without being asked, took the plates off it and put on a set of old farm plates registered to his own dead brother's name. So it's not in her name anywhere. And he never said a word about why, just handed me the keys and looked at the ground. The quilting circle made the kids' clothes, made them by hand, so there'd be no receipts, no record, nothing to find, and left them folded on my porch like the casseroles, anonymous, warm. And nobody, in a town of 411 people who could not keep a secret to save their lives, posted a single word online. Not one photo, not one "bless this beautiful story." I watched, I checked. Vane himself, after I explained it to him plainly, got up that next Sunday. Mara wasn't there. She never came to town, and he told his whole congregation, without nomming a soul, that there were times the most Christian thing a body could do was shut up and quietly help. He said sometimes love looks like silence. He said it like it cost him something, because for a man who loved a beautiful story, it did. I went home and told Mara what the town was doing, how it was helping with both hands and no name, how a whole place full of people who lived to talk had decided, for her, not to. She didn't believe me at first. Then she started to. And one evening she stood at the porch rail looking out at the dark with Theo on her hip, Theo, whose cough had been gone 2 weeks, who'd gotten fat and loud and was pulling himself up on the furniture now, and she said, not to me exactly, more to the field, "I keep waiting for the bill. There isn't one. That's what I can't." She stopped. Her free hand was working the porch rail, that nervous thing she did, picking at a splinter that wasn't there. When something's free, the price is later. That's the rule. That's the whole rule. "Maybe," I said, "Walt time. Or maybe you've been living somewhere the rules were broke and you got handed a broke set. And you've been trying to run a life off rules that were never the real ones." I leaned on the rail next to her, not too close. My Dell used to say the world's about evenly split between people who'd take the coat off your back and people who'd put theirs on it. And the only trouble is they look the same in the dark, so you got to wait for light to tell. Mara was quiet a long time. "I don't know how to tell anymore," she said finally. "I lost it, the telling. He took that too." "Then I'll tell for you," I said, "till you get it back." I thought that was the turn. I thought we were through the hard middle and headed somewhere gentle. 2 years a widower had made me soft about endings. I'd started to believe, watching her relearn how to sleep with both eyes shut, that this was going to be a clean and rising thing. It was the 3rd Thursday, when the gray sedan came up the access road. I didn't recognize it. Mara did. She was hanging wash on the line Dell had strung between the elm and the porch post 20 years before, and she had a clothespin in her mouth and Theo in the playpen on the grass beside her, and Devon was throwing a stick for Brister. And the whole scene was so ordinary and so good that I'd been standing at the kitchen window just watching it. the way you watch something you're scared to want. I saw the clothespin drop from her mouth. I saw her turn to stone. The exact rigidity from the first night, the headlights, the people coming. But worse, because this wasn't a casserole. The sedan stopped at the foot of the drive. A man got out, tall, easy in his body, in a good jacket, with a way of standing that took up more room than one man should. Even at that distance I could read him. I'd seen that ease before. It's the ease of a man who's used to rooms going quiet when he wants them to. And Devon, my Devon, 5 years old, who'd been laughing with the dog a half-second before, Devon went absolutely silent and walked backward, slow, until he was behind his mother's legs. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He just disappeared behind her the way a creature that's learned the rules makes itself small, and there is no sound on earth worse than a 5-year-old who already knows how to hide. The man at the bottom of the drive smiled and lifted one hand, friendly as Sunday, and called out across my yard in a warm, carrying voice. "There's my family, been looking everywhere." And I felt Walt time fail me completely, because there was no slow left. There was only the next second and what I did in it. And I had a wash line full of tiny handmade clothes snapping in the wind, and a woman gone to stone, and a boy who'd vanished into her shadow, and a man walking up my driveway like he already owned the ground. A gray sedan at the foot of my drive. A man getting out of it the way a flood gets out of a riverbank. My boy Devon, and somewhere in those weeks he'd become my boy, I won't pretend otherwise, gone silent and small behind his mother's legs. And the man calling across my yard in a voice warm as a Sunday morning, "There's my family." I've thought a long time about how to tell the end of this, whether to make it bigger than it was. It would be easy to, but the truth of it is smaller and stranger, and it matters more for being small. So I'm going to give it to you the way it happened, in real time, in the length of about 4 minutes that rearranged the rest of my life. I came out the kitchen door. I didn't run. I want that understood. A running man tells the other man he's afraid, and a man like that lives on the fear of others the way my cattle live on grass. So I came out slow, drying my hands on a dish towel, Walt time, like a man interrupted at the sink by a salesman. "Help you?" I said. The man kept his easy walk going up my drive. Up close he was younger than me by 20 years and better looking than the situation deserved, with a jaw you could have hung a gate on and eyes that did all their work below the smile. The smile was for me. The eyes were already past me on Mara, doing inventory. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, and his voice was reasonable, so reasonable, the most reasonable voice in any room he'd ever been in. "That's my wife. Those are my kids. She's not well, she gets these spells, she takes off. I've been worried sick, drove 3 counties. He shook his head, rueful, a good man worn thin by a difficult woman. "I appreciate you taking them in. I do. I'll get them out of your hair." It was a good performance. I'll give him that. If I'd met him cold before any of it, I might have half believed him. He had the whole package, the worry, the patience, the little laugh that made you the reasonable one for going along. But I'd watched a 5-year-old walk backward into his mother's shadow without being told to. And a body doesn't fake that. You can't drill a child into that kind of quiet with one bad afternoon. That's a thing that gets built, over time, with repetition, the way you wear a path across a yard. "What's her name?" I said. He didn't miss a beat. "Mara." "And the boy?" "Devon," a flicker. "Look, friend, I don't know what she told you." "She didn't tell me anything," I said, and this was true, and I leaned on it. "She's barely said 3 words about you the whole time, so I'm just a man trying to figure out who's standing in my yard." I folded the dish towel slow over my forearm. "What's the baby's name?" And there it was. The pause, half a second. A man knows his children's names the way he knows his own hands. There's no reach for it. But he reached. I watched him reach, watched the smile hold while behind it he ran through what he'd been told, and he came up with, "Theodore," he said. Which was right. It was right. But he'd had to find it, and finding it was the whole answer, and we both knew that I'd seen him find it. His smile changed, not much, just the temperature of it. "Mara," he called past me, warm again but with a thread of iron under it now, that we're going to do this the easy way thread. "Baby, come on, get the kids, I'm not mad, I drove all this way, come on now." And I heard her breathe in behind me. I heard the breath she took to answer. And I knew, the way you know a storm by the smell before you see it, I knew she was going to do it. She was going to gather the kids and go, because that voice had a hook in her that he'd set so deep over so many years that it could reel her in across a stranger's yard, because the broke rules were still the only rules she had, because when something's free the price is later, and here, finally, was the bill. I want to tell you I said something wise. I didn't. What I did was small. I turned around, putting my back to the man, which a part of me screamed not to do, and I looked at Mara. And I didn't say don't go, and I didn't say he's lying, and I didn't say any of the big things. I just held out the dish towel to her, the dumb, ordinary dish towel, like we were in the middle of the chore we'd actually been in the middle of, and I said, "Theo's nap's at 1. You want to finish this line before he goes down, or you want me to?" It was nothing. It was the most nothing thing in the world. But it was ours. It was a thing from the life she'd been building for 3 weeks, the wash line, the nap schedule, the small, ordinary architecture of a day where nobody was afraid. I was reminding her with a dish towel that she had one of those now, that there was a different set of rules running right here in this yard, and she'd been living inside them for 21 days, and they were real. They were as real as the one at the bottom of the drive, and she got to choose which set she answered to. She looked at the dish towel. She looked at me, and something crossed her face that I'd been waiting 3 weeks to see and hadn't known I was waiting for. The telling came back. The thing he took. I watched it come back into her eyes, the ability to look at 2 men and know, in light, which one would take the coat off your back and which would put his on it. She didn't take the towel. She picked up Theo out of the playpen instead, and she put her other hand flat on the back of Devon's head where he was pressed into her leg, and she stood up straighter than I'd seen her stand. And she looked over my shoulder at the man at the bottom of my drive, and she said, in a voice that did not shake, that was not low, that for the first time in 3 weeks did not keep the fear under her tongue because there wasn't any fear left to keep. "His name is Theo, not Theodore. You never once called him Theo. You never once got up at night with him. You don't know his name because you never learned it, you just owned it." She wasn't crying. That was the thing that undid me. She was past crying. "We're not coming. Get off this man's land." Now here's where the town comes back, and here's the part that earned the title. And here's the part I still can't tell without stopping. The man's reasonable face came off like a wet shirt. He took a step up the drive fast, the easy gone, the real thing showing through, and I moved to put myself between him and the porch, 58 years old with bad knees and a dish towel. And I won't lie to you, I was scared. I was good and scared. And that's when I heard the trucks. I hadn't called anybody. That's important. I want that clear. I'd had no time to call a soul. But Sherry Dunlap, it came out later, had taken it on herself 3 weeks back to put the word quiet around the county. If you ever see a strange car asking after the Coomer place, you call, and you call everybody. And the man in the gray sedan had stopped for gas at the Halsey station and asked Wendell Pry, who pumped gas and missed nothing, if he knew where a fella named Coomer lived, on account of his wife was staying out there. And Wendell had given him directions, wrong ones first to buy time, then he'd made a phone call. So they came. Not police, not yet, though the sheriff was 20 minutes out and coming. They came in pickups and in Earl Peckseck's flatbed and in the church van that Pastor Vane drove like a man possessed, and they came up my access road in a line, dust and diesel, and they did not say one word. They just got out. Earl and Wendell, and the Scarda brothers who farmed the next section, and Pastor Vane in his Sunday shoes, and behind them Sherry Dunlap getting down out of her son-in-law's truck with her bad foot, slow, and 4 or 5 women from the quilting circle, and more headlights still turning in off the county road. They didn't threaten him. That's the thing. Nobody raised a hand. They just stood, a half circle of them between the gray sedan and the porch, this whole town that had spent 3 weeks loving a woman it had agreed never to name, and they looked at the man, and the man looked at 30 people who had appeared out of nothing. And he did the arithmetic that men like him always do, the arithmetic of can I win this, and he came up short. Sherry Dunlap walked to the front of them, bad foot and all. She walked right up close to him, this little woman who came up to his collarbone, and she looked up into his reasonable face, and she said loud enough for all of us, loud enough that I wrote it in the notebook that night word for word. We know who you are, not your name, we don't want it, but we know what you are, mister, because half of us has buried one or married one or been one, and you are not a new thing under the sun. You're just the oldest thing there is. She didn't blink. There's nothing for you here. There's a whole town here, and not 1 inch of it is yours. Now you're going to get in that car and you're going to drive, and the sheriff's going to follow you to the county line and well past it, and if you ever come back, you won't be talking to Walt. You'll be talking to all of us, every time, forever. The man looked around the half circle one more time. And then he laughed that same short, ugly laugh, trying to take the size of it back. He said something I won't repeat about Mara, meant to wound, and I saw her flinch, and I saw Devon's hand tighten in Brister's fur, and I started forward. But the town didn't move, and the town didn't flinch, and somehow the town not moving was bigger than anything I could have done. He was throwing rocks at a mountain. After a second he felt it, how small the rocks were, and he got in his car. And he drove. And Sheriff Aldous, who'd come up the road just then, turned his cruiser around and followed that gray sedan all the way out of the county, and I heard later, sat on its bumper through 2 more counties besides, just to be sure. I'd like to tell you it was clean after that. It wasn't. Healing isn't clean. There were court things, hard ones, that ate up the rest of that year, protective orders. A custody fight he filed mostly to keep his hooks in. Lawyers Mara couldn't afford until the church benevolence fund, and an anonymous envelope with $1,100 in it, I have a guess. But Sherry never said made it so she could. There were nights Theo's old cough came back, and nights worse than that, when Mara would wake up sure she'd heard a car, and I'd put the kettle on at 3 in the morning and we'd sit, not talking much, until it got light and she could tell again. But she got better at the telling. Every week a little. That was the thing to watch. By summer she could take a casserole off the porch and just eat it, no waiting for the bill. By fall she had a job at Dunlap's, behind the very counter where Sherry had started the whole thing, and she was good at it, and she laughed at the register sometimes. A real laugh now, the whole thing, not the broken half a laugh from the barn. Devon started kindergarten. He still got quiet sometimes, but he got loud more. He named one of the new barn kittens Brister 2, which insulted Brister 1 greatly. And the town never told. That's the part I marvel at to this day. The story of the family in the barn became the talk of all of Halsey, but it was talk that stayed inside Halsey, the way a family talks about its own, with the front door shut. Not one word ever went out into the wide, hungry world that might have carried back to him. A town that couldn't keep a secret kept the one that mattered, kept it for years, kept it because it finally understood the difference between the kind of talking that protects a person and the kind that feeds her to the wolves. I'd lived among these people 3 decades and thought I knew them. I didn't know the half. You never do, I think, until something asks them to be more than they've ever had to be, and you find out they had it the whole time, banked like coals under the ash. Mara and the kids don't live with me anymore. I want to be careful how I say this, because the easy ending is the wrong one, and Dell hated a liar. They moved into town 2 summers on, into the little house behind Sherry's, fixed up by men who wouldn't take pay for it. It was the right thing. A young woman building a life doesn't build it in an old widower's spare rooms forever, no matter how kind the rooms got. We both knew it was time. It was still hard. The morning they loaded the last of it, The house went quiet again in that way that has nothing to do with sound. And I stood in the kitchen, where the steam used to fog the window, and I felt the 2 years of being alone reach for me again. But it's not the same alone. That's the thing. They come Sundays. Theo's 4 now and calls me Pop, which nobody taught him. He just decided, the way he decided to live that first cold night in the straw on his own against the odds loud. Devon's reading. Mara brings pie and tells me I don't eat enough and stands at my counter eating off my plate, free, no bill, never a bill. And here's what I keep coming back to. What I wrote in the notebook the night they moved out. The entry that comes a few hundred pages after something in the barn. B won't settle, going to look. I thought I'd saved them. For 3 weeks I let the town make me into the man who saved the family in the barn, and I stood warm at that fire, and it took me a long time and a gray sedan to understand I had it backward. She came into a house where a man had stopped being the person his wife would have wanted, and was telling himself it was all right because the wife was gone. She came into a town that had spent 30 years keeping quiet the wrong direction, and a child she'd carried across a frozen field put his small fist into the fur of an old dog and trusted, against everything the world had taught him, that the dog would be kind. We didn't save her. She walked into the coldest, emptiest places 3 lives had to offer, my house, my town, the dead winter of myself. And one by one, just by being a thing worth opening up for, The dog is asleep on the porch as I write this. The kettle's on, Sunday tomorrow. I find I don't need to finish the sentence. I think you've got it. I think you had it before I did.